So, hey Leigh, it's so good to have this chance to talk with you. For any of you who don't know, Leigh Balance is a longtime member of Millbrook, and he's for years been a Sunday school teacher and a leader here. And he is a prayer and a healer. And I know that you'll be glad to hear his witness. Leigh, I know that you've been a person of faith for a long time, but that recently you had an experience where you looked around in the world around you and what is happening, and you had kind of a calling for such a time as this. And that's what our message today has been about from the book of Esther. And so I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that, how you felt that particular calling at a particular time from God.
Well, I call that moment a watershed moment for me. And I discovered something about a watershed moment that I think people who have those are not people who go out looking for that event to happen in their life. It just happens. I think when Moses woke that morning, he had nothing on his mind about burning bush. But there it was. It happened. The other thing I have discovered about watershed moments is that God's fingerprint is always all over it because it changes you. And it changed me. I had been concerned about the divisiveness, the rhetoric, the name calling, all the things that were going on in our country. But I didn't do anything. I didn't speak out. I just remained silent. And then there was this moment at a local college where I was listening to the speech, and the speech was full of that kind of divisive dialogue. And I don't know why that particular speech did it, but it did. It said, you have to change. You have to speak up. You can no longer remain silent. You can no longer just rest on teaching Sunday school, serving on committees at the church, and doing church work. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of that, but that's work inside the church. And what I felt was that I needed to turn my attention to outside of the church. And so the Social Justice Committee was formed. Now, the people who joined that committee came with different concerns. Some, like me, were concerned with the divisiveness, the rhetoric that they were hearing. But others were concerned about gun violence, domestic violence, sex trafficking. Some were concerned about what was taking place in our environment. Some came to the table concerned about how we treat our immigrants and the injustice that was taking place there. And then most recently, we've seen the protest of the racial injustice. And as I started thinking about that, I decided that maybe I need to go back to our committee and add a paragraph to address that issue as well. And so this is what I'm going to suggest that we add to our statement. It starts out Isaiah 1:17. Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. Therefore, as members of the Social Justice Committee, we encourage all members of Millbrook United Methodist Church to actively participate with all people of color to fight for equal justice under the law and seek to encourage changes in the way we police our community, our state, and our nation. I was listening to Reverend Will McLean coming back from the beach the other day. And in that sermon, he talked about when he was in college, he had a roommate for a couple of years, and they became very close friends, and this particular person was a person of color. And one day he confronted Will, and he said, Will, I've noticed something about you over these last 2 years, that you and I are for the same social justice issues. But when the going gets rough and there's any hint of maybe being hurt or suffering, you have a tendency to bow out. So I say to you, you need to choose to be in the struggle, or stop pretending to be involved of doing it at all. And that kind of stuck with me, to choose to be in the struggle. So my prayer is that God would give me wisdom and courage to choose to be in the struggle. And if I had a prayer for Millbrook, it would be the same prayer.
Thank you, Leigh. And that's really so resonant with Esther's story, because she faced that same struggle, because she was afraid something would happen to her, or she would lose her privilege, or she would lose her place, or really even her life. But the gospel tells us to do that. And I've heard you tell this beautiful story about your long history of being a Sunday school teacher, and then you talk about you look in the mirror. Can you tell that story? You know what I'm talking about?
Well, I struggled after that watershed moment, that I thought I was doing God's work and that it was sufficient to teach Sunday school. That as long as I taught and I stuck with that I was making a difference. And there's certainly, again, nothing wrong with teaching Sunday school. But I found that I was short of my goal of really serving the Christ that I want to serve. Teaching is one thing, doing is a whole entirely different thing. And that I had to do something different. In addition to teaching, I had to do something different. And that was the call, that you got to get away and look outward and quit. Don't just look inward, look outward. And that's what I heard.
Yeah. Well, thank you for risking. And as you know, both of us, white people, and with the measure of privilege that we have, it is a choice to risk. And when I feel afraid or tired or uncertain, like Esther did, like many of us do, I think of, I even think of our body at Millbrook. I talked with one of our members, an African-American woman, and asked her how she was doing. And she talked about the way she risks at work advocating for the young African American men there to be treated with respect by the supervisors, because she holds, because of her longevity and her, she's just held in high esteem because she's amazing, but that she was using the measure that she had, even as an African American woman, and in the social pecking order, they are at the bottom. But yet in this setting, she had privilege and she was risking that. And those stories inspire me as well. When I put that together with Jesus saying, take up your cross daily. And I'm so grateful to have members like you and others who are doing that in the world and are helping our church to do that. And I think, as I've heard it, that is the story of Millbrook, is that we respond.
That's right. And I don't pretend that the struggle is going to be easy. I don't think it will. But they don't call it struggle for nothing.
That's right. Well, Leigh, thank you for being called for such a time as this. And like Mordecai and Esther, may we share in boldness and not bowing down to the gods of empire and follow the one true God. Thank you.
Amen. Amen.